My name is Marisol Delgado. I am 34 years old, and for most of my life I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and proved myself thoroughly enough, my father would eventually see me the way I saw myself. I was wrong. I should have known it sooner. There were signs as early as my 20s. Looks exchanged across dinner tables, comments that landed soft but cut deep, the particular silence my father used when I said something he didn't want to acknowledge. But I told myself those things were incidental. I told myself families were complicated and love was imperfect, and that the distance between us was just the ordinary friction of a father and daughter who were too similar to get along cleanly. I kept working. I kept showing up. I kept believing the ledger would eventually balance. It didn't. There is a folder in my home office, 43 pages, tabbed and dated, that I have been adding to for 3 years. I did not know when I started it that I would ever need it. I know now that I was wrong about that too. What I do for work takes some explaining, and I'll get to the specifics in a moment. What matters first is who I was before any of it, before the company, before the contracts, before the thing that changed everything. I grew up in a mid-sized house in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the second of 3 children. My father, Ernesto, ran a regional equipment leasing operation that had been in the family since my grandfather built it in the 1970s. My mother, Patricia, managed the books part-time and spent the rest of her hours making the house feel like a place worth coming home to. My older brother, Tomas, was understood from early on to be the one who would inherit the business. Not because anyone said it plainly, they never did, but because the assumption ran through every family conversation like a current you couldn't see but could always feel. I was not the heir. I was the one who helped. I want you to sit with that for a moment, if you have people in your own life who know exactly what that role feels like. The one who helps, the one who stays late, the one who never quite gets credit for what they built because the building itself was supposed to be enough reward. I graduated from the University of New Mexico with a degree in information systems in 2012. While Tomas had spent 4 years at a state school studying business administration and returning home on weekends, I had spent those same 4 years working 20 hours a week at a campus tech support desk to cover the gap between my partial scholarship and tuition. My father had offered to help with costs. He had offered to help with Tomas's costs too. The difference was that Tomas's help arrived as a monthly deposit. Mine arrived as a reminder that I should be grateful for what I had. After graduation, I took a junior analyst position at a small software consulting firm in Albuquerque, 40 minutes from home. My starting salary was $41,000. I drove a 2007 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a heater that worked only on the highest setting. I brought lunch every day in a blue insulated bag I had carried since sophomore year. I did not think of any of this as hardship. I thought of it as the beginning. I was good at the work. I was better than good. Within 14 months I had been promoted once, taken on 3 accounts that technically sat above my pay grade, and quietly identified a recurring gap in how mid-sized companies were managing their operational software licensing. They were overpaying badly on maintenance contracts they didn't understand, and nobody in the market was helping them fix it. I started keeping notes. I started building a model. I did that on evenings and weekends at my kitchen table with a second monitor I had bought refurbished for $180. I was 23 years old. I had $4,200 in savings. And I had the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. ACT-2 first dismissal. The first time my father told me my work didn't count, I was 25. It was a Sunday in March, late afternoon, the kind of gray New Mexico day when the sky goes flat and the mountains disappear into it. My parents' house smelled like red chili and warm tortillas. Tomas was already at the table when I arrived, sitting in the chair closest to our father the way he always did, as if proximity to Ernesto was itself a form of currency. My mother was in the kitchen. I had driven over because my father had asked me to come. He wanted to talk about the family business, he said, specifically about the software systems they used to track equipment inventory. I knew those systems. I had helped set up the current one 3 years earlier, during a summer when the business's previous vendor had gone under and left them scrambling. I had spent 6 weeks doing it, evenings and weekends, without pay, because my father had asked and because I was good at it and because at 22 I still believed that being useful was the same as being valued. At dinner, Ernesto laid out the problem. The inventory software was struggling to scale. They had added 40 new leasing accounts in the past year, and the system was showing its age, slow reporting, missed sync errors, a recurring data corruption issue in the maintenance schedule module that was costing the operations staff hours every week. He wanted to know what to do about it. I had actually looked at this problem 3 weeks earlier, on my own, because Tomas had mentioned it in passing during a family call, and I had recognized immediately what was causing it. I had written up a 2-page summary of the issue and a proposed fix. I pulled it out of my bag and set it on the table. My father looked at it. He did not pick it up. Tomas has been talking to a vendor, he said. They came in last week. Seems like they know what they're doing. I can fix this without a new vendor, I said. The problem is in how the maintenance module is indexing. It's a configuration issue, not a software failure. 2 days of work, maybe 3. No licensing cost. Tomas leaned back in his chair. It's not really your area, Mari. I folded the edge of my summary page under my thumb and said nothing. He means it's a business decision, my father said. You do your tech work. We'll handle the business side. The vendor Tomas had spoken to charge them $23,000 for a system migration that took 4 months and did not fully resolve the indexing problem. I know this because my mother told me, quietly, 6 months later, while we were washing dishes after a Sunday dinner nobody had particularly enjoyed. She said it in the tone she used for things she wanted to acknowledge without making into an argument, a tone I had learned to translate as, I see it too. I just can't say it out loud. I said nothing about the $23,000. I said nothing about the 2-page summary still sitting unread in my childhood bedroom where I had left it by accident. But I did not forget. The pattern after that was not dramatic. It was quiet. It was 1,000 small moments that each seemed survivable on their own, and it was only when you stepped back and looked at the whole line of them that you saw what they added up to. My father did not yell. He did not demean me in ways that were easy to name. What he did was more precise than that. He organized his attention so that I was always slightly outside its center. Family decisions were discussed with Tomas first. Business problems were brought to me only when Tomas had already weighed in. When I offered a perspective that differed from Tomas's, my father would nod in a way that meant he had heard me and then proceed exactly as he had planned. The worst instance of this, before the Christmas that ended everything, happened when I was 28. By that point my own work had grown into something real. I had left the consulting firm and started my own small operation. 2 clients at first, then 4, then 9. I was working from a rented office in a converted warehouse in the East Downtown District, sharing a floor with a graphic design studio and an architecture firm. I had one part-time employee, a recent graduate named Delia, who handled client scheduling and invoicing while I did the technical work. I was making more money than I had ever made before, and I was doing it entirely on my own, without my father's name attached to any of it. That Thanksgiving, I brought a business card. Not to show off, I had been going back and forth about whether to even mention it, and in the end I brought one card and put it in my jacket pocket and told myself I would only take it out if it came up naturally. It came up naturally. My uncle asked what I was doing for work, and I told him, and I gave him the card, and he looked at it with what seemed like genuine interest. My father glanced at it across the table. Software consulting, he said, in the tone he used for things that didn't quite merit a full sentence. Same as before. Not exactly, I said. I have my own clients now. My own operation. A few clients, Tomas said. He was not being cruel. He was being accurate in the way that accuracy can sometimes be the cruelest thing available. That's good, Mari. It's a start. I reached for my water glass and held it without drinking and set it back down. My father turned to my uncle and resumed a conversation about the equipment leasing market that had nothing to do with me. Later, in the kitchen, my mother touched my arm and told me the card was impressive. I thanked her and meant it. But impressive was not the same as seen, and by then I knew the difference. ACT3 flashback, years-long pattern plus labor inventory. I want to go back further, because what happened at Christmas cannot be understood without the 11 years that preceded it. When I was 23 and building my model at the kitchen table, I did not yet know what I was building. I knew the problem I was solving. Software licensing for mid-sized operations companies was a mess, and nobody was cleaning it up in a systematic way. But I did not know that the solution I was developing would eventually become a company with 22 clients across 4 states, annual recurring revenue of $2.1 million, and a net margin that would have made my father's equipment leasing operation look conservative by comparison. I also did not know that my family would, over the course of those 11 years, become financially entangled with what I built in ways they did not fully understand and that I had never fully explained. Let me be precise about that entanglement. When I was 24, my parents' house needed a new roof. The original estimate came in at $18,500. My father told my mother it would have to wait until spring because the business had had a slow quarter. I had just landed my second consulting client, a regional medical supply distributor who was hemorrhaging money on legacy software, and my first check from them had cleared the week before. I paid for the roof. I did not make an announcement. I told my mother I wanted to help and wired the money and asked her not to say anything to my father about where it came from. She said she wouldn't. She kept her word. I was 25 when Tomas's first child was born, and the hospital bill came in larger than he had expected, $7,200 after insurance, because of a complication in the delivery that required a specialist. I sent a check and told Tomas it was from savings. It was not from savings. It was from an equipment audit I had completed for a client in Santa Fe the previous month. Tomas said thank you and moved on. He did not ask where the money came from. He rarely did. I was 26 when my father's equipment business lost a major client, their largest single account, a construction company that had been leasing from Ernesto for 9 years, and the shortfall threatened to delay payroll for the business's 7 full-time employees. My father did not come to me directly. He mentioned it to my mother, who mentioned it to me, in the way that information traveled in our family, sideways through intermediaries as if the asking itself needed to be buffered. I transferred $34,000 into the business operating account. I told my mother it was a loan. We both understood it wasn't. I did this the way I did everything in my family, quietly, efficiently, without drama, and without extracting any acknowledgement in return. I covered the emergency furnace replacement at my parents' house when I was 27, $6,400, paid directly to the HVAC contractor. I funded Tomas's daughter's first year of private kindergarten tuition when I was 28, $9,100, because Tomas had mentioned the school in a tone that made clear he wanted it and couldn't quite afford it, and because I was at that point billing enough that $9,100 felt like something I could absorb without changing anything about how I operated. I paid the property taxes on my parents' house for 3 consecutive years, from when I was 29 to 31, because my father's business was going through a protracted slow period and my mother had quietly indicated that things were tighter than usual. Each year's bill was between $5,800 and $6,300. I paid them by certified check from a personal account my father did not know existed. I hired my cousin Letitia, Tomas's wife's younger sister, as my second full-time employee when she was 22 and had just been laid off from a restaurant job. I paid her $46,000 a year to start. She was still working for me at the time of the Christmas dinner, making $61,000 with full benefits. And during all of this, the roof, the hospital bill, the payroll gap, the furnace, the kindergarten tuition, the property taxes, the job, my father continued to treat my work as a side project. Something I was doing in the meantime. Something that would eventually resolve itself into something more recognizable, more serious, more like what a Delgado was supposed to do. There was a specific evening I returned to, more than any other, when I think about those 11 years. I was 31. It was a July evening, dry and very hot, and I had driven to my parents' house to help my mother with a plumbing issue in the second bathroom. Nothing complicated, a slow drain that had become a stop drain, but my father's back had been bothering him, and Tomas lived 40 minutes away. I fixed the drain in about 20 minutes and then stayed for dinner because my mother asked and because I liked being in that kitchen when it wasn't charged with anything difficult. After dinner, my father and Tomas sat on the back patio and talked about the business. I could hear them through the screen door while I helped my mother put away the dishes. Tomas was proposing a new leasing category, agricultural equipment, newer market, higher margins. My father was cautious but interested. They went back and forth for nearly an hour. Neither of them came inside to ask whether I had any thoughts on the operational software implications of adding a new equipment category, which were real and specific, and which I had been thinking about since Tomas mentioned the idea at Easter. I dried a casserole dish and set it in the cabinet and listened to the low sound of their voices through the screen. My mother did not say anything. Neither did I. But I remember the specific weight of that casserole dish in my hands, and the way the screen door made the patio look slightly blurred, and the feeling I had that I was watching something I was not allowed to be part of, from a room I had helped keep standing. The second incident I returned to is smaller, but in some ways more precise. I was 32, and I had just signed my largest client to date, a regional property management company with operations in 3 states, a 3-year contract worth $480,000 in total. It was the deal that made my company real in a new way, not just viable but substantial. I told my mother. She was genuinely happy and said so. I told Tomas in a group text because there was a family dinner the following weekend and I thought it might come up. At the dinner, my father asked Tomas how business was going. Tomas talked for several minutes about a new leasing contract they had landed. A good contract, $160,000 over 2 years, solid news for the business. My father asked follow-up questions. He leaned forward. He was interested in the way he was always interested when Tomas was the one talking. My contract did not come up. Tomas did not mention it. I did not bring it up myself. I squared the edge of my napkin against the table and let the dinner continue. That was when I started keeping records. Not out of malice. Out of precision. I opened a separate folder on my laptop and began logging every financial transfer I had made to members of my family since I was 24. Amounts, dates, recipients, descriptions. I also scanned every relevant document I had, bank statements, wire confirmations, checks I had photographed before sending. I put copies in a fireproof box in my home office and a second set in a safety deposit box at my bank. I did not know at the time exactly what I was preparing for. I knew only that I was done being imprecise about what I had given. ACT4, triggering incident. The Christmas dinner was my mother's idea, the way it always was. She called me in the first week of December, 3 weeks before Christmas, and asked if I would come. She said the whole family would be there. Tomas and his wife Renata, their 2 daughters, my uncle and his wife, 2 of my father's cousins who were visiting from Las Cruces. She said she was making her red pozole and the pan dulce I liked, the kind with the pink sugar crust. She said it would be good to have everyone together. I said yes because I always said yes. Because despite everything, she was my mother, and her pozole was the best thing I had ever eaten, and because I had spent 11 years believing that the next dinner would be different from the last one. When I packed my bag the morning before the dinner, I put the folder in it. Not with a clear plan. Just with the particular knowledge of someone who has stopped pretending they don't know what is possible. It started well enough. The house was warm and smelled exactly the way it always smelled in December, candles and chili and something sweet from the oven. My uncle embraced me at the door and asked about work with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Tomas's daughters were 8 and 5 now, and the 5-year-old had recently decided I was her favorite person at any family gathering because I was the only one who would play the card game she had invented, which had rules that changed whenever she was losing. We ate in the dining room, the big table that came out only for holidays, the one with the uneven leg that my father had shimmed with a folded matchbook in approximately 1994 and never properly repaired. I sat between my mother and my uncle's wife, which was a comfortable position. Neither at the center of things nor fully outside them. The first sign came midway through the meal. My father was talking about the new year, about the business's plans for the next quarter, about a leasing opportunity he and Tomas had been evaluating. He was in the expansive mood he sometimes got at Christmas, willing to talk about the future as if it were a place he was confident he could reach. He mentioned that they were considering bringing on a second operations manager, that the business had grown enough to justify it, and that Tomas had been thinking through what the role would look like. Then he looked down the table at me and he said, "You should think about coming on board, Mari. Help out more formally. Now that you're at a point where the freelance work has probably run its course." The table went slightly quiet. not dramatically, not in a way anyone would have noted afterward, but in the way that families go quiet when something has been said that everyone at the table registers but nobody wants to be the first to address. My throat tightened. I felt it before I had any thought to attach to it. The freelance work, I said. It's a good thing you've built, my father said, and his tone was the tone of a man who considered himself generous. But it's hard to grow a one-person shop past a certain point. You know that. We could use someone with your skills in the operation. Give you something stable. I have 22 clients, I said. I have 3 full-time employees. My father looked at Tomas. Tomas looked at his plate. Still, my father said, family business is family business. I set my fork down on the edge of my plate and looked at the centerpiece. A cluster of pillar candles my mother had arranged in a shallow dish of dried rosemary, and I did not speak for a moment. Then Tomas's wife Renata said, quietly, without looking up from her food, "It would be nice for you to have something with benefits, Mari. Something secure." She said it in the same register my family always used for cruelty. Kindly, logistically, as if she were simply noting a practical reality that everyone at the table had privately been thinking. And then my father said the thing that ended it. He said, "It's not just the business side. You're 34 and you're still doing everything alone. Your mother worries. We all do. A woman your age, no husband, no children, it's not what we wanted for you. Maybe if you had more stability you'd have room for the other things." The room was quiet. The candles made small movements in the still air. I looked at my father. I looked at the centerpiece. I looked at my mother, who was looking at her soup bowl with the precise expression she wore when she could not defend what was happening but could not bring herself to stop it either. I picked up my fork and set it down again. "Get out," my father said, and I understood that this was not the beginning of the sentence, that there had been a sentence before it that I had missed, or that he had only said internally, or that the whole dinner had been the sentence and this was just its last word. "If you're going to sit at my table and look at me like that, go. Come back when you can be part of this family." I stood up. My chair made a sound against the floor. My uncle's wife put her hand over her mouth. The 5-year-old looked at me with enormous eyes from across the table. "All right, Dad," I said. "I'll go." I got my coat from the hook by the front door. My mother came into the hall behind me. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on my arm for a moment and then let it go. I walked to my car. The air outside was cold and completely clear, the kind of December night in Albuquerque where you can see every star and they don't seem comforting at all. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. I started the car and drove home. I did not go back the next day. I went back 4 days later, on the 28th of December, because my mother called and asked me to come, and because I had decided that if I was going to do this, I was going to do it when I had stopped feeling it so acutely and could simply be precise. I told her I would come in the afternoon. I told her to make sure my father was there. She paused on the phone before she said she would. Tomas was there too when I arrived, which I had not asked for but had half expected. He was sitting in the living room with my father when I came through the door, and I understood immediately that my mother had called him as a buffer, or that my father had called him as a witness, or both. Tomas looked uncomfortable in the way he always looked when the family's interior logic was being disturbed, not guilty exactly but aware. My father did not get up. He looked at me from his chair with the expression he used when he believed he was being patient with someone who did not deserve his patience. "You came back," he said. "I did," I said. I set my bag down on the coffee table. I took out the folder, 43 pages, tabbed and dated, and I placed it on the table in front of him. I did not open it. I sat down across from him and I put my hands in my lap. "I want to show you something," I said. "Marisol." His voice had a warning in it. "I'll be brief," I said. Tomas leaned forward. "Mari, whatever you want to say, we can talk about it." "I'm not talking to you yet," I said. Not unkindly. Just accurately. I opened the folder to the first tab. December 2013, I said. Roof replacement, this house. $18,500. Paid directly to the contractor. I have the wire confirmation and the contractor's receipt on the same page. I turned it so my father could see it. I did not push it toward him. I set it back down. My father's expression did not change, but something behind it did. A small internal adjustment, like a door shifting in its frame without opening. I turned to the second tab. March 2014. Hospital bill, Tomas and Renata, delivery complication. $7,200. I told Tomas it was from savings. I paused. It wasn't. It was from a client payment I had received 11 days earlier. I have the deposit record and the check stub on this page. Tomas was very still. I went to the third tab. October 2015. Business operating account shortfall, Delgado equipment. $34,000. Wired to the business account to cover payroll for 7 employees. My mother mentioned the situation to me. I transferred the money the following day. I looked at my father. You never knew it came from me. My mother and I agreed she wouldn't say. My father looked at my mother, who was standing in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, and the look she gave him back was not an apology. There's more, I said. I'll go faster. I went through the remaining pages at the pace I had decided on, steady, neither rushed nor drawn out. Furnace replacement, 2016. Kindergarten tuition, 2017. Property taxes, 3 consecutive years, $5,800 to $6,300 each. Employment for Letitia, starting salary $46,000, current salary $61,000 with benefits. When I reached the last tab, I stopped and closed the folder. The total, across 11 years, is approximately $247,000 in direct transfers and payments, I said. That doesn't include Letitia's salary, which has been paid out of my company's payroll for 4 years. It doesn't include the 6 weeks I spent setting up your inventory system in 2012, which I did without pay. I looked at my father. You told me 4 days ago that my freelance work had probably run its course. I have 22 clients. I have 3 employees. My annual revenue last year was $2.1 million. The room was quiet in a way that had texture to it. I don't want the money back, I said. I want to be clear about that. I gave it because I wanted to. Every time. I paused. But I'm done pretending it didn't happen. My father opened his mouth and then closed it. Tomas said quietly, Mari. I know, I said. ACT 6, aftermath/exit statements/fallout. My father did not speak for a long time after that. When he did, what he said was not an apology. It was something more characteristic of him. He said he hadn't known, which was true, and then he said he hadn't realized, which was also true, and then he said he wished I had told him sooner, which was the part that required me to be careful. I tried, I said. You never. I tried differently than you were listening for, I said. That's not the same as not trying. He looked at the folder on the table. He did not touch it. I had decided, in the 4 days since Christmas, that I was going to say the things I had been carrying and then let them go. Not because my father had earned the hearing, but because I had earned the saying. At dinner, I said, you told me the freelance work had probably run its course. You've been saying versions of that for 11 years. I kept my voice level. When I was 25 and I brought a 2-page summary to fix your inventory problem for free, you told me it wasn't my area. I had already solved the problem. You paid another company $23,000 for a partial fix. I paused. What I was actually doing during that time was building the skills that eventually brought in $2.1 million a year. Your assessment of what I could do was not accurate. My father looked at the floor. When I was 28, I gave Tomas's card at Thanksgiving and you said, same as before. I had just left a salaried job to run my own operation with paying clients. I let a moment pass. What I was actually doing was signing the contract that made my business viable. The one that was not the same as before. Tomas shifted in his chair. His face had gone through several things in the last 20 minutes and had settled into something that looked like the beginning of understanding, which was more than I had expected from him. At Christmas, I said, you told me I was 34 with no husband and no children, and you said it in front of the whole family, as if those were debts I owed you. As if the reason I didn't have those things was instability. My throat was clear. My voice was clear. What I was actually doing for 11 years was keeping this family financially stable in ways that none of you asked about and that I never required you to acknowledge. Until now. I stood up. I squared the folder on the table and left it there. The records are yours, I said. All of it is documented. I'm not asking you to repay anything. I'm asking you to understand what the last 11 years actually were. My father looked up at me then. Really looked the way he hadn't in a very long time, and what I saw in his face was not the capitulation I had imagined in weaker moments and not the dismissal I had braced for. It was something more uncomfortable than either. It was recognition. The specific recognition of a person who has organized his understanding of someone around an idea that has just been made untenable. He did not say I'm sorry. But he nodded, once, slowly, the way he nodded when something had registered and he needed time to find its place. I put on my coat. My mother walked me to the door. In the front hall, she held my face in both her hands the way she had when I was very small, and she said, I always knew. She said it quietly, the way she said important things. I always knew what you were doing. I know, I said. I should have said it out loud more, she said. I kissed her cheek and told her I loved her, and I meant it completely. Tomas caught up with me in the driveway. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders slightly forward, which was the posture he had when he didn't know what to do with his hands or his face. I didn't know about the money, he said. All of it. I knew about my bill, but I thought. I know, I said. That's a lot to have carried. Yes, I said. He looked at the ground. I've been an idiot. Some of the time, I said. Not all of it. He looked up, surprised, and I saw him almost smile. I'd like to have lunch, I said. After the new year. Just us. He nodded. Yeah. I'd like that. I drove home with the heat on and the radio off, and somewhere on the highway north of the city the mountains came visible against the evening sky, very clear and very still. ACT 7, Reflective Epilogue. It is February now, and the world has not changed in any of the ways that I used to imagine it might. My father and I are not repaired. That is the honest word for it, not repaired, and I have stopped expecting us to be, because repair implies a return to something prior, and I am not sure the prior state was ever worth returning to. What we are is something newer and more uncertain. We are in contact. We have had 2 phone calls since December. They were not long calls and they were not comfortable calls, but they were real ones, which is more than I could say for most of the conversations we had when I was still performing the role of the daughter who needed nothing. He asked, on the second call, if I would be willing to look at the inventory software again. The problem from 10 years ago had never been fully resolved and had spread into a second module. He asked in a particular way, carefully, with a formality he doesn't usually use with me, and I understood that the asking itself was the gesture, even if he would never name it as such. I told him I would take a look. Tomas and I had lunch in the second week of January at a place downtown that we both liked, and we talked for 3 hours. He told me things I hadn't known. About the pressure he had felt his whole life to be the one who held the business together, about the specific loneliness of being the designated heir in a family where that title came with more expectation than support. I told him things he hadn't known. By the end we were not different people, but we were people who had a more accurate picture of each other, and that felt like something worth building on. Letitia still works for me. She got a small raise in January and handled the news with the complete professionalism I have always appreciated about her. She does not know the full story of what happened at Christmas. She knows that I seem lighter than I did in December, and she has said so, and I told her she was right. What I think about now, when I think about those 11 years, is not the money. The money was the evidence. What I think about is the specific quality of the labor I was doing. The labor of being underestimated, of continuing to build something real in the absence of any acknowledgement that it was real, of keeping other people's roofs over their heads while they questioned whether I had the stability to keep my own. That labor is its own kind of competence. It does not always get named. But it does not go away. I used to think that the point of being seen was to change what people believed about you. I understand now that the more important thing is to know, clearly and specifically and with documentation if necessary, what you actually did, what you built, what you paid for. The record exists whether or not anyone chooses to read it, and there is something in that, something that took me a long time to find that has nothing to do with anyone else's recognition at all. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've spent time in a family where your work was the foundation everyone stood on without knowing it, I hope this found you today. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. It might mean more than you expect. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All names, characters, events, and situations are entirely fictional and do not represent real people or actual events.